climate change is scary. Let's face it, the forecasts of doom and gloom, of unpredictable storms, unprecedented droughts, of flooded cities and burned out croplands will scare anyone. But there is another fear, a fear that for some is even more overwhelming than the future that scientists predict. That fear is change. Hi, my name is Cody Townsend. I'm a career professional skier based out of Tahoe City, California, and a climate advocate. I've been close to witness in my career the degradation of glaciers, the crumbling of mountains, the diminished snowpack, and the shortening of winter in my short lifespan. My anecdotal notes always seem to match up with the macro projections of what climate scientists were predicting. So I changed my life and became an activist for climate. But as I began speaking, advocating, and attempting to get more businesses and individuals on board with changing their ways, their votes, and their voice to join me, I realized the fear of change now was superseding the fear of what might happen later. As a professional skier, I deal with a lot of fear. Skiing slopes where one bad turn can be the difference between life and death. It's sort of my specialty. So today, I'm joined with Kate Williams, CEO of 1% for the Planet, to talk about that fear of change, the barriers to entry in climate advocacy, and what I've learned dealing with fear, and hopefully how that can help others overcome. So Kate, how are you doing today?
Good to meet you, Cody. Good to see you. I'm doing well. I'm super psyched for this conversation. I think really getting to the heart of the matter about what holds us back is really interesting to me and really important too at this time.
For sure. I've definitely found it really fascinating to see what holds people up in terms of being an advocate for climate or changing their life. And, so much of it I feel like is based on a debate of science, but I feel like that hasn't been it. There's something more there. There's just this feeling of change now that tends to overwhelm people's ability to want what they know is going to kind of happen, or want what they want to change in their own life. So, as someone that's working with a lot of these companies that are starting to become advocates for climate and dipping their toes into it, what are you seeing as like one of the primary barriers of entry?
Yeah, I think it's such a great point what you're saying, because we talk about the data and the science, and fortunately I think we're moving into a time when it is more accepted finally that climate change is a thing and is really happening and is something that needs our attention. But I think you're absolutely right that still doesn't get to the heart of the matter, which is that oftentimes then, even once you accept that to be true and even see the real life examples as you described, it can be hard to know what to do. And so I think there's fear that people feel in a bunch of different ways. So fear that they're not going to be enough. We see that, like, you feel kind of overwhelmed and paralyzed and kind of like, what does my little action do? Like, why do I matter? And that's a form of fear. And then I think there's also fear of doing the wrong thing. And that's often more at the company level, like fear of a misstep, which is, and these are, we sometimes sort of cast fear as like a weakness, and I don't think it is at all. I think it's, oftentimes our bodies being really smart about what we need to be thoughtful about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, just as a skier and, someone who's faced those real life and death moments. But I think it's the same impulse when we're sort of thinking like, is this the right thing to do? So, fear of not being enough, fear of making the wrong choice or wrong commitment. And then, I think maybe like just a broader fear of the unknown, like what's going to happen. So I think we see all of those. And, what we're trying to do at 1% for the Planet is invite people into making a commitment to give, to drive change. Very simple at one level, but also complicated. Like, what does it mean to give? How do you do that? So all of those fears do come up. So, we have some strategies for how we talk to people, but I'd love to maybe hear from you, standing at the top of one of those really steep pitches where one wrong move is life and death. Like, how do you think about that? How do you coach yourself?
Yeah, I really like what you said about perceiving fear as a weakness. And that is completely like wrong in my world, because having dealt with fear a lot, and I'm always out there, and you're scared. It's steep, it's gnarly. A wrong turn could be the difference between life and death. That's a very fearful situation. And if you have fear, you want to use that. To me, having no fear is one of the worst things you can do. It means you're not evaluating your surroundings, your situation properly. So when it comes to what you're talking about, like, yes, you want to have that fear because it helps guide your decisions. And for me, that's what I start to do when in the mountains. And I always evaluate that there's two different types of fear. There's rational fear and irrational fear. And there's very, very distinct differences between them. So irrational fear is quite often like an emotional fear. That is something like basics, like I'm scared of spiders, even though they're not necessarily going to do many things to you. So for me, climbing up a steep slope can feel very scary. But when you evaluate the situation, like I've got a rope on, I've got protection, I've got ice axes and crampons in as I'm climbing up this, all of a sudden I think about it and realize that like actually your chance of falling right now is absolutely minimal. It's something that's probably not going to happen. So this emotional fear is bubbling up is just purely emotional. And at that point, I can then kind of tamp it down. But then there's rational fear, and that is something that should be paid attention to. And that's the kind of decision making where you're climbing under a big cornice, a big serac, the avalanche danger is high, and there actually is true risk. And what I find is trying to differentiate between those two fears, it helps me create my best decisions in that moment. So if I'm sitting up there and thinking like, oh my God, this is scary, and reevaluate my surrounding situation and realize, no, I just feel scared, and this isn't actually scary, then I realize I can proceed. And when I see that with like companies and climate change and making decisions in your life, I feel like sometimes the fear is more on the irrational side, and that you can kind of tamp that down, but then use the rational fear to make better decisions. Like, hey, I'm going to do things like buy an electric car because that will help, the rational fear of future of climate, what's going to happen in the future, make better decisions for myself. So distinguishing between those two fears is kind of the biggest thing I find for myself when navigating in the mountains, and then hopefully when navigating your own decisions in your own life.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good distinction. And two things. One, I am a little bit irrationally afraid of spiders. I will just confess to that. And I'm guessing you put on skis for the first time at some point in your life, right? And you didn't immediately start going up slopes where you had to be roped in and had to use ice axes. So like I think there's also a progression of fear, or of managing our fear, right? We have to kind of learn along the way. And I think that's something that's really important to think about with the unknown of climate change. I mean, that's part of the fears. It's like a pretty big, scary mountain in that sense, and we don't necessarily know what we're capable of. So tell us about your progression to being able to tamp down those fears when you're, what for some people it would be scary to say, okay, I'm roped in and I have an ice axe. That feels scary because that must mean I'm on a really big, steep thing on which I could fall. So it would be great to hear kind of how you got there, because I think that's another sort of way in which we can think about how we get to sort of handling the unknown of climate change.
Yeah, definitely. And I will give my antidote, and I want to pitch it back to you because I think it'll be very pertinent to what I say to how companies and individuals are, using 1% for the planet to change their ways. And for me, to deal with things that are scary, like you don't just jump in head first into dangerous situations. Like I used to jump very big cliffs in my career, and people would ask me like, how do you jump off 100-foot cliff? And you're like, well, you don't start by jumping off a 100-foot cliff. You start by jumping off a 2-foot cliff. And then you do that 20 times, and then you jump a 5-foot cliff, and then you jump a 10-foot cliff, and you gain this experience of how it feels to be in the air, how it looks, how the landing is gonna be, and you start to just kind of baby step your way up to a 100-foot cliff. Like for me, I was jumping my first cliffs when I was 5-6 years old. I jumped my first 100-footer when I was about 21. So there's years of experience built up to that. And that's why I kind of talk about to people when you're dealing with this stuff is this 5% increments, like going from a 10-foot cliff to a 15-foot cliff, just increase by 5%. You never want to jump 50 to 100% of what your experience and skills can dictate. You're just kind of slowly one-upping yourself every year, every day, kind of challenging yourself just a tiny bit every time you go out there. And that's how I always say, like, that's how I've been able to do the things that, go viral, that show up in ski movies, that have won awards and whatnot. It doesn't feel like it's crazy to me because it's been decades of experience to get to that point. And that's where I wanted to know when it comes to the advocacy side, are you seeing 1% for the planet, which seems like a big commitment of, a company saying they're going to donate 1% of their proceeds to the planet. Is that a big jump for them, or is this kind of one of your first baby steps into climate advocacy?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and you've given us such a good mental, physical image, because we also are of the incremental mindset that everyone has a 1%, and you start with that 1%, and you're absolutely right to point out that 1% for a company, 1% of sales, is actually a kind of big number. It is maybe starting at a 10, 20, 50-foot, 100-foot cliff in some cases. So the way we really try to invite people into it is to acknowledge that it's a big jump and to provide a lot of support. So, it is saying, hey, you can do this because you don't have to do it all at once. Your first year will, provide support and advice, and there are different ways you can kind of break it down into, those baby steps that you were mentioning. So I do think that concept of knowing that you're not going to be the sort of viral big leap all at once is really important. Sometimes people want that and they don't necessarily understand what are the steps to get there, but I think it's often, it almost is always really welcome. And then, it's very helpful to have support, because sometimes doing 2 feet 20 times, may feel frustrating if what you really want to do is 100 feet, so you have to, that's where our community comes in. And I think that's another important thing is, fear can sometimes be lonely because you're a little bit oh, is anyone else scared? And you're not sure if you can say that. And so I think, what 1% for the planet does is not only provide this way to make a commitment to kind of break it down to size, but also to do so as part of a community. So, tackling fears and taking on the unknown with other people, and being able to, with those other people, say, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me figure out how to do this? Or not even sometimes to have to say the words, I don't know, but to have people to step in and say, hey, I remember when I was a new member and I didn't know how to do this. Let me help you figure this out. I think all of that is really important. And I think, one thing too that I would add is incremental processes, part of what they do, whether it's, figuring out how to jump off a higher cliff or figuring out how to, give in ways that are meaningful to you and drive change around the issues that you care about, doing them over time is incrementally scary. So one of my favorite quotes is from Eleanor Roosevelt, and it's that do one thing every day that scares you. Because we have to sort of practice stepping into the unknown, trying things that are a little scary, because then not only are we getting better at jumping off a higher cliff or giving more, but we're also getting better at managing fear and understanding that fear is energizing and kind of gives us an edge that enables us to press beyond what we thought we could do. And then you look back a year and it's oh, that was scary last year, that's no longer scary, and so now I can tackle these other things. So I do think the incremental growth not only makes us able to do more things, but it also makes us or I should say it this way, one of the things that it enables us to do is not just the thing itself, but the management of the fear. So I think that's really important. Back to the community piece, because I'd love to hear for you, like I do find, and we see this in our community, that there's, our model provides a way that people can step into their beliefs around climate in a supportive way that enables them to kind of work through some of what may have been, creating fear. And they really benefit from not only our amazing staff providing support and learning, but also from each other. And, I'm curious what your experience is. I'm sure you've taught many people how to, find themselves skiing and find themselves as skiers. And how do you do that? How do you help other people to manage fear? It's one thing to manage it in yourself, but how do you kind of extend that to other people?
Yeah, and what I'll first kind of say to that question is, what I find interesting with sport and seeing things happen in front of you, for myself, I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. My heroes that I grew up watching ski were the ones that started to form my ideas of what was possible. And then you work your way to what they're doing and then step it up over time. It's kind of the nature of sport. It's the nature of life. We see and witness the successes or the amazing things that other people or companies are doing. And then we look at them and go hey, I can do that and stand on top of them and build up from them. I don't think anything in life, whether it's inventions or sport or actions, can be said to be just solely individualistic. It is always built upon others. So what you're talking about with community and what you're talking about some of this experience that you're giving companies, I feel like it's really fascinating because we're always just incrementally raising our actions based off the actions of others before us. And then when it comes to then translating that for others, one, I think it's through just showing that you can do these things, doing the same that my heroes did for me, of trying to show hey, this is possible, doing the things that seem impossible and showing them this is possible, and then waiting for the next generation to build upon that. And then when it comes to, let's say, someone that just comes up to me as a skier and goes how do I conquer my fear of heights? How do I conquer my fear of going fast down a mountain? Again, I always just go back to this baby step mentality. It's just you slowly have to build up on something, and you gotta start somewhere. You just gotta. You don't dive in head first, but you got to dip your toes in, even though if you're afraid of the water, you just got to start to wade from your toes to your ankles, to your knees, to your thighs, to all of a sudden you're fully in. And that's why I'm kind of curious too, is you're bringing this experience and this community with 1% of the planet. But what is that dipping the toe in for a lot of companies? What is that first thing that you suggest companies do if they do want to follow their beliefs and be an advocate for climate and change their ways? I'll say I'm an owner of a company, and we manufacture belts. It's called Arcade Belts, and we're doing a massive change that is very ecologically based, doing all of our materials to recycled, biodegradable, and it's really, really scary because we're changing over the success of our business for the last decade into something entirely different. But what's that first thing that you suggest companies do to dip their toes into this, to get to, change their raw materials or donate 1% of their proceeds to 1% for the planet?
Yeah, it's a really awesome question, because there always is that first step. And so first I'll just say congrats on what you're doing. That sounds really amazing and scary and brave and important. Yeah, and it's hard. Yeah. What I hear in what you're saying and in how you're saying it and in your voice as you're saying it is really what we kind of look for and invite our members and just companies that we're talking to who are interested into, which is what do you care about? What do you love? What are you kind of willing to be brave for? And a lot of times that's the key, because it takes energy and courage. I mean, courage really is sort of having fear, experiencing fear, and then being willing to take action even as you're feeling that fear, in part because of that fear. And so I think what part of the work that we do with our members is, a big part of it is what we call partnership advising. And essentially that's where we're helping and working closely with those members to figure out, like, what is it that you want to give to? What really matters to you? And I think it really does come down to sort of touching base with whether it's a really small company, and so it's about what the founder cares about, or a bigger company and it's about what the brand and company values kind of stand for. But either way, it like comes down to, where is there sufficient sort of values-driven energy that you can then sort of use that to fuel your giving or your action. And I think oftentimes once that's tapped into and clarified, then the nature of those sort of first steps or first action becomes clearer. So when we have a member who, their product is used in, well, I should use our founders. So Yvonne Chenard and Craig Matthews were fishing on the banks of the Madison River 20 years ago. It's our 20th anniversary. And they were, realizing that what they were doing, the gear they were using, some of which was from their own companies, it all depended on having a healthy environment in which to fish on a riverbank that they could stand on land that was protected, or at least not yet developed. And so they realized, like, what our businesses need in order to thrive and to continue to thrive and continue to serve customers is a planet that is also thriving. And so they can't be separate. So our businesses have to invest in the future of that healthy planet. So for them, it was like, well, of course, then we must give back. And they had been doing it in different ways, but what they sort of crafted on the banks of the river that day was, let's create a way to bring other companies into this. Because whether, for us, it's a direct connection. We're, what we do is, get outdoors, and we're standing here getting outdoors, and we want to continue this. But for all companies, there's no economy if there isn't a healthy planet to have that economy operate on. And so, so really the genesis of 1% for the Planet is this concept of tapping what is meaningful to you and then using that to fuel the hard choices that you'll make to, do those things that cause a little fear and that cause you to do things differently and that cause you to be outside of your comfort zone because they're different than how you were doing them before and different than how people around you have been doing them. But, I think what we see time and again is, and I know you've experienced this on, in your own skiing, is like once you do it, there's so much like energy and confidence that comes from kind of, sticking through, being smart about how you sort of navigate through the fear and accomplish something. And then that energizes you to take the next step and the next step. So I think we have really practical steps as part of the advising work that we do, but a lot of it comes down to getting really clear about what are your core values, what do you love, what do you care about, what is so meaningful to you that it's worth it to you to kind of go that extra step to take that risk.
I think what you said about the passion is the most poignant to me, because I've said this so often in my career, and you get the advice like, hey, how do I become a pro skier? How do I chase my dreams and whatnot? And I always say, if you have enough passion and obsession, then there is a way. You'll figure it out. So what I kind of find interesting with this is that it doesn't have to be following the model of like, hey, we're going to just reduce our carbon output. Like if your company is about soil preservation, if it's about recycling, if it's just doing, that's what you feel passionate about as your business leader, as your company, then that's what's going to create success for you. And that's what's going to create this path that you end up going down. And that passion is going to supersede that fear, because so often in my career, of course, I was fearful that I wasn't going to achieve my dreams, that I was going to go, try to be a pro skier and fail at that, and then get into these situations in the mountains that are scary and back down. But it was always just driven with like, no, skiing is my life. This is something I'm so passionate about. It is what I love, that I'll figure out a way to overcome. So I really like what you're talking about, is that and want to point out that it doesn't have to be what you see out there and just copy that model. You as a company and you as a person, if you're passionate about something you care for this planet, for your community, for whatever it is, then chase that and do that. And then you'll figure out a way to create a better world because of your passion for that. It's interesting that you bring that up. And I like that to point out that we have freedom within this. We don't all have to follow the exact same model to creating a better world and a better environment.
I think that is so spot on. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that you highlighted that, because I do think, thank goodness. I mean, if we all were following, if we all were following the same model, we would not be creating the change we need, because we need more diversity in our change than that. Also, there is no model. I mean, that's the other thing we have to remember is like this is new territory for everyone. So of course we should feel scared. It is unknown. Like, we don't know. We are creating the future that we need. And that's hugely exciting, because it is a choice, and it does create this great opportunity for all of us to lean in on those things that we're passionate about, because then together we'll sort of have the tenacity to stick with it. Because, that's the other thing, is it does take a lot of tenacity. It's not like you just sort of wake up tomorrow and you're like, oh, cool, now I'm a climate advocate, I got this in the bag, or whatever the thing you're working on. And I think, really knowing that, yeah, you got to wake up tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So you absolutely have to have that passion, because you're going to have days where you wake up and it's like, kind of feeling a little tired and chicken, and I don't really want to deal with any of this. And that's okay. I mean, we're all going to have days like that. And over time, you need to sort of listen to what are those things that you actually do keep getting up for, and then, follow those. And, we need people who are bringing, creative, artistic perspectives to help us see the world differently. We need people who are helping us to understand how, as people, we can communicate better. We need people who are doing the hard climate science. Like, we need it all, and we benefit and are lifted from it all. And that actually brings me back to one point that you made that I think is super important, which is that we're not the first or the last. We are part of this, continuity of people who have been making brave choices, who have been trying their best, who are kind of showing us the path to the extent that they could get it there, and then being psyched for us to take it to the next level. And, this is a really hard time for humanity and the world. But there have also been hard times before and unknowns before. And, we have a history, a human history, a world history, a sort of species, bio ecosystem history of incredible adaptability and creativity. And we get to kind of tap into all of that. And we also get to further all of that. So I do think remembering that we, as you put it, are both standing on the shoulders of those who have come before us, and getting strong so that we can be the shoulders for the next generation. To me, that's really energizing to think about it that way. And it also, on those times when it feels heavy and lonely, it's a reminder of okay, not the first person, not the last person, part of a human community, part of a diverse community, not just human, that's adapting and figuring things out. So I do think that was a great point for us to think about, because again, fear, as I said before, is something that can often, you feel alone and you feel like you can't, it's hard to say I'm scared in this moment. And so remembering that you never are really, that that we are part of experiment and we're all in it together.
I agree. And I like what you're kind of saying, and it brings me to a thought of, quite often, if you think about fear, if you're in a group scenario, so if I'm with 4 people, we're up on a mountain, it's a dangerous mountain, we're scared, and one person is obviously more scared than another. You don't combat that other person's fear by screaming at them, by telling them, don't be scared, there's nothing to be scared about, anything like that. We don't criticize that person's fear. The only way to work through it is with empathy. So when you're kind of talking to somebody that is scared, you acknowledge that fear and you say, let them talk it out loud and work through it in their own way. And usually I've found those are the kind of situations that you can get through it if there is empathy. And so when it comes to this like creativity and what you're talking about, this humanity working together and people all coming together with a diverse set of outcomes or diverse set of principles and ideas and kind of attacking this this global problem with from 1,000 different angles. To me, one of the things I see with climate advocates and companies is this lack of empathy when talking to others. They're saying, you're not doing it the correct way, we're doing it the correct way. You're not inventing in the correct way, we're doing that. You're not changing your life in the correct way. And to me, that just creates kind of more fear and more hesitancy. And hesitancy is not good in a fearful environment. So treating others in this space and other companies with empathy and walking them through this process, I think is absolutely essential to overcoming some of these fears, to overcoming the day-to-day burden that you take if you're trying to do something beneficial for the planet or your community. So I like that you brought that up because it's such an analogy to me in the mountains and working as a team together. Like we're in this as a team, as a planet, trying to overcome this. And I'm like you, I'm optimistic. Humanity's faced a lot of problems, but I think we can overcome. But I think if we don't match other people's work with empathy, then we're just going to continue to kind of divide our progress and turn people around. As an analogy to the mountains, you'll lose a member on your team because you didn't treat it with empathy.
Yeah, I think that's really such an important point. And one of the things that we think about at 1% for the Planet is how to invite people into change. My own experience, and I've seen this like certainly with my kids and with others, is like when you kind of come at someone like this, they don't really change. They get stubborn and they turn the other way. And that's not to say that we don't, we can't sort of stand for something really clearly and strongly, but I think doing so in a way that invites people into it. And that's more sort of both and than either or, because none of us have all of the answers. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying we don't need, there's not room to be really strong on what we believe in. We certainly have, as we talked about, like there's need and room for passion, for clarity that the action needs to be taken. But the way we do it with empathy, as you're saying, which I think is so important, and with that, creating the space for people to be on their journeys and to sort of be navigating the fears that they may have that we may not, have insight into. But if we can continue to create space for people to kind of progress their journeys for the health of our planet, for the health of people, I think that's when we get to really sort of turn things around and create back to that community, create that community that creates more support. So then, more people can lean in and step into taking those incremental steps toward change. So I think we've connected a bunch of really important dots here, which, I feel like going back to sort of where you started with like being a lone skier, making choices, it often does feel like that. And many of our day to day, we are like taking those steps by ourselves and needing to figure out like how to tamp down our fear, how to balance the rational and the irrational. But I think the more we can do that with an awareness that every time we do that, we're getting stronger, and that we're part of a community, and that together we can be so much stronger and braver than any one of us alone could ever imagine. That's pretty cool. And that's right there for us.
Totally. No, I think it's been a really cool talk with you, Kate, and what you're doing at 1% of the Planet is amazing. And I think, what we're all doing out there as advocates and, the way we're changing our lives and the way we're hopefully, chipping in for this planet, I think is really cool. And learning from each other, a skier to a business leader and a business leader to a skier, I think is all part of the process. So I really appreciate talking with you. I know I learned a ton from you, and hopefully hopefully vice versa. And I hope to be in touch with you. And thank you for the talk, Kate.
Absolutely. We'll right back at you on all fronts. And thank you as well. I really appreciate it.